Welcome back. I'm very pleased to say we're joined by Dr. Michael Auslin. He is a resident scholar and the director of Japan Studies at the highly regarded American Enterprise Institute in Washington. He's a biweekly columnist for the Wall Street Journal in Asia. He is also the author, most recently, of Pacific Cosmopolitans, a cultural history of U.S.-Japan relations. He used to teach at Yale University. He's now teaching us all here at Secure Freedom Radio. Welcome, sir. Good to have you back.
Thank you for having me, Frank.
You have been writing specifically about some of the great relationships in Asia at the moment, great power relationships, you might call them, great challenges, great game is a term that you've conjured up from days of yore in Afghanistan. Talk a bit about Russia and China, and specifically the inroads China is making day by day in Siberia, the implications for the Russians, and where it all may lead.
Well, I think it's something that we don't pay attention to enough, given, understandably, all the other problems that we're facing around the world. But when we do think about it, it's pretty much a simplistic, Moscow and Beijing are finding common ground, and Putin and Xi Jinping are sort of creating an alliance against the U.S., and I think the reality is much more complex. They have found common ground. They have created a working relationship, but the geopolitics of that relationship are very, very unique and specific, and they go to Russia's weaknesses, China's strengths, the centuries-long unease and competition between them, and if we don't understand exactly what's happening, I think we're going to miss opportunities potentially to split them apart and even play them off against the other. A lot of it centers on Siberia and the energy resources that Russia has and China wants, but it also goes to the broader long-term questions of demographic decline and position in the world. And so it's really a case of Russia trying to make the best of what we can, and China very slowly and patiently moving itself towards getting a dominance in the Siberian region.
You know, one other facet of this that I believe is a factor in the kind of working partnership, as you called it, between Russia and China, of course, is access the Chinese have been given by Vladimir Putin to pretty advanced Russian armaments. And I keep wondering, when you look at the possible de facto, if not de jure, loss of Siberia, Michael Auslin, on the one hand, and the arming of China by the Russians, or at least enabling the buildup of arms with Russian technology and breakthroughs on a host of different fronts, whether Vladimir Putin has got kind of the old Louis XV mantra going, après moi le déluge, it's I'm out of here, and it'll be somebody else's problem. Do you think that's at work, or is there something else going on?
Well, this, again, it's a great question because it gets to the real complexity of this relationship. Obviously, they've had a very long arms relationship between the two. China, certainly when it was beginning its military buildup, bought a great deal of Russian arms, trying as well to create their own indigenous industries. And so what they've done often, and the Russians have finally cottoned on to this, is get the basic prototype or the basic models that they want to build and then start building their own. And particularly this is with fighter craft. It's funny, by the way, Frank, we forget how well the Russians do in arms production and sales. They're behind us globally, but, they still build some of the world's greatest fighter airplanes, and in some ways better than what we're able to do, since all we've got on the boards is the F-35. And the Chinese desperately want to be able to use this technology, and like they do with everyone else, it's not that there's a different set of dynamics in the Russian-Chinese relationship. The Chinese basically want to take it, more or less steal the technology, and then build it themselves. So actually in recent years, the Russians have been a little more hesitant as to what they're going to sell the Chinese. And so the Chinese are working off of slightly older variants, and in fact now have decided what we have to do is build our own indigenous stealth fighters and others. So I think this is actually an example to me of the tenseness and the long-term tenseness of this relationship, and not just a simplistic alliance, anti-American alliance that has developed.
Yeah, a kind of modus vivendi for the moment, but they'll be back at each other's throats as they have been for most of their history. Michael, let me turn to another great power with its own complex dynamic with communist China, namely Japan. Tell us a little bit about what Prime Minister Abe has been up to in terms of reposturing his military, getting the authority to do that, and how it's playing domestically and internationally, for that matter.
Sure. Abe is doing a very, very broad-based rethink and restructuring of Japan's security policies. On the defense side specifically, he has reversed a decade-long decline in the defense budget. In fact, Japan has a record high defense budget this year, about $42 billion, which is the third year in a row that it has been increased under Abe. He is moving ahead with modernization plans all across the board on the air and sea and in space as well. But he's also changing the laws that basically have prohibited Japan from taking a larger security role in the post-war period. The famous Peace Constitution in Article 9. He is not revising the Constitution, but he has reinterpreted it. And right now is going through the process of passing all the laws that are needed to deploy the self-defense forces abroad for collective self-defense. It's very controversial. He has lost a lot of popularity at home by doing this. But I think that also misstates some of the story of what's going on in Japan. The Japanese are very risk-averse. They are obviously very conservative, but their view of the world has changed. They see a North Korea that the United States did nothing to prevent from getting nuclear weapons. They see a China that has grown relentlessly, maybe slowing down economically, but is not slowing down from a security perspective. And again, a question of how willing the United States is to stand up against it. And so I think there's actually going to be longer-term support for what Abe is doing to allow Japan to play a more active role to defend its interests, and from a geopolitical perspective, to reach out to other potential partners and players, not just the United States, but those in Southeast Asia and India as well. I actually think this is going to be very transformative. I don't know how far it's going to go, but I think when we look at the end of it, 10 years or 15 years out, we're going to see a very different balance of power in Asia, and one that is spearheaded against the Chinese by Japan.
You talked about North Korea, another problem in that part of the world, maybe not a great power exactly, but one that certainly has achieved a degree of preeminence, certainly regionally, arguably internationally, through its relentless pursuit of nuclear weapons. And as you say, we did not stop them from getting them, despite an agreement that purportedly was supposed to do that. Talk about that as a model for what's happening now and what we should expect from the deal with Iran that the president has just conjured up.
Yeah, I think we need to look very, very carefully at our recent history and the failure of the Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations from preventing North Korea from getting a bomb, deterring it from taking actions, including, by the way, not just a bomb, but a ballistic missile capability that allows it to potentially reach the United States. The negotiating pattern that the United States engaged in, I'm very worried, has become a template for would-be proliferators. They understand and have led the United States and know how to outmaneuver our diplomats, keep them at the table, dangle just enough in seem-to-be concessions so that the United States won't walk away, and then use that time to achieve their goals, as North Korea did. It is almost uncanny the way that the Iranians have done the same thing. We know they've been in touch with the North Koreans and watched very carefully. And if we don't learn the lessons, which, again, I have to reiterate, are unfortunate lessons coming from both Democratic and Republican administrations, then we are going to have a future where would-be proliferators, no matter how small or how strong they are, have a roadmap for essentially getting U.S. diplomacy to help them get the bomb.
Yeah, it's an obscene arrangement, I must say. Michael Auslin, thanks for the work you do at the American Enterprise Institute and for joining us from time to time to talk about your large and very dynamic and increasingly worrisome portfolio of Asia. Keep it up, as I say, and come back to us again very soon. Next up, another perspective on Asia with our duty expert on the region, Gordon Chang, straight ahead.